So you leave a social situation, a party, or a family dinner, or a big work event, and you feel completely drained. Not tired, but drained, as if something has been taken from you. And the person beside you is buzzing, energized, and ready for the next thing. And you've probably told yourself some version of a story about this, about yourself, that you're shy, that you're antisocial, that you don't like other people, that you don't like making friends, or that something is just wrong with you socially. But here's what that story misses entirely: that exhaustion, what you feel, is nothing other than exactly what your nervous system is supposed to be doing. But once you understand the biology behind it and possibly some of the research, you'll start to understand why you're like this and start to understand yourself a little bit better. So stick with me. My name is John. I'm studying psychotherapy and I find all this stuff fascinating. So we've two main concepts today: Eysenck's arousal theory of introversion. This explains why social situations deplete some people while energizing others, and the difference between dopamine pathways and acetylcholine pathways in the brain, which kind of explains what actually recharges you and why. By the end of this, you'll understand why this exhaustion you feel after social situations is just a feature of how your nervous system is built. So, the common explanation for why some people find social situations exhausting is usually one of two things. The first is shyness. You're introverted because you're nervous around other people. Social situations are draining because they make you anxious. This is the most common explanation for introversion, and it's nearly entirely wrong. You see, shyness is basically about fear of social judgment, but introversion is something completely different. The second explanation is that introverts just don't like people as much as extroverts do. They prefer their own company. They find others tiring. This is also not quite right because plenty of introverts love the company of people, genuinely. They just have a different relationship with social stimulation. You see, the problem with both of those explanations is it treats introversion as a choice or a preference or as something psychological, but it's not psychological, it's neurological. And that's the difference I'm going to explain. So, Hans Eysenck was a British German psychologist. I think he was born in Britain. And in 1997, he was recognized as the most cited living psychologist in peer reviewed research, second only to like Karl Marx and Sigmund Freud, amongst the most all time cited individuals. And Eysenck's work on personality and biology is foundational. And in 1967, he published something called Where the Central Argument is that Introversion and Extroversion are not just simply personality differences. They're fundamental expressions of how a nervous system can be differently calibrated. Specifically, introverts have a chronically higher baseline of cortical arousal. So let me explain what that means in plain language. Your brain has an optimal arousal zone. It's a level of stimulation where your brain functions at its best. Not too much or not too little. It's a bit of a Goldilocks dynamic. And your brain is constantly fighting to get back into this zone. Now, extroverts tend to have a lower resting baseline. They start their day understimulated relative to their optimal zone. So they seek out noise, novelty, activity, stimulation, because all of those things will bring them up to where they need to be. Now, introverts, they have a higher resting baseline. So they start their day at or even above their optimal zone. And this is before anything has even happened. So when the social situation arrives for an introvert, it tips them over the edge. It gives them too much in relation to their optimal zone. And it needs time to come back down. And that's why you feel you need 3 days of silence after a party. Not because you're antisocial, but because your nervous system was closer to the edge before you even walked through the door. This is the arousal spectrum. You have high stimulation or arousal on the right and low stimulation or arousal on the left. In the middle, the green part is the optimal zone. It's where your brain functions at its best, focused, engaged, and performing well. Now, here's the extrovert's resting baseline. They wake up understimulated, so they need to seek stimulation to get into the optimal zone. People, noise, social interactions all feel good for this nervous system because they literally are. Here's the introvert's resting baseline. Now, there are people who fall somewhere in the middle of the spectrum. They're known as omniverts, but I'm specifically talking to the people who feel exhausted after social situations. Introvert resting baseline. You see, they're already close or even past the optimal zone. So they're already overstimulated before they even walk into a social interaction, which is harder work for their brain because it's already fighting to come back to that optimal zone. And when you're up here past your threshold, your nervous system is already fighting to manage the input. Things like processing conversations or reading facial expressions, managing multiple people at the same time. That can become very expensive neurologically quite quickly. And when you leave the social interaction, you don't just feel tired, you feel depleted because you were depleted. There's a second layer to this that not just explains why social situations drain introverts, but what actually recharges them too. So, PET imaging studies, which are brain scans that measure cerebral blood flow, have found that introverts and extroverts actually use different neural pathways as their primary reward system. Extroverts have more active dopamine pathways. Dopamine, as we talked about in the first video on this channel, I think, is the wanting neurotransmitter. It drives seeking, novelty, external reward. Social interactions trigger dopamine release in extroverts. That's why they leave a party buzzing. Their reward system just got activated. Introverts favor a different pathway, acetylcholine. This is a neurotransmitter associated with calm focus or deep thinking, internal processing, and sustained attention. It activates not during high stimulation, but during quiet, reflective, focused periods of activity. So introverts aren't recharging the same way extroverts are. They don't need rest from people and then more people. They need a fundamentally different kind of input, reading, thinking, a one-on-one conversation that leads somewhere, real positive connection, focused creative work even. Anything really that engages the acetylcholine pathway rather than the dopamine one. This is why telling an introvert just to push through social interaction doesn't work. They're not tired in a way that more coffee or more willpower will fix. Their reward system just needs a different type of fuel. So, what does all this actually mean practically for introverts? The first thing is important, it's stop pathologizing the exhaustion. If you're one of the people who leave social interactions feeling exhausted or drained, that's not a sign that there's something wrong with you socially. It's your nervous system communicating quite clearly that it's been pushed past the threshold. And this information is useful because it tells you something real about what you need. And the second thing is understanding that recharging looks different for introverts than it does for extroverts. Rest for an introvert isn't just sleep or doing nothing. It's engaging the acetylcholine pathway, quiet, focused activity, something that requires attention but not social processing. That's what actually restores the nervous system. Not just an absence of people, but the presence of the right type of stimulation. And the third thing is, and this is a more practical one, it's managing your arousal levels before the social situation rather than only trying to recover after them. If you know you're already running close to your threshold, and introverts more than likely often are, then walking into a high stimulation social situation without any buffer is setting yourself up for depletion, early depletion. Even 10 or 15 minutes of quiet before a social event, and I mean genuine quiet, so not scrolling, will give your nervous system room to absorb the incoming social situation rather than tipping over. And it sounds simple, but it works because the biology is actually real around this. So stop calling yourself antisocial. You're not someone that needs to try harder at being around people. You simply have a nervous system that arrived to the social event at a higher resting baseline than some other people's. So social engagement or social interaction, social stimulation doesn't recharge you. It costs you. And that cost is real and it's visible on a brain scan. This is science backed. Now, I do understand that understanding that doesn't make the social exhaustion disappear, but it does mean you can stop spending that energy on being ashamed or confused about it and start spending it on taking care of what your nervous system needs. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. I would really appreciate it. There's plenty more content like this on the way.